This is so wild because what I want to do right now is explain a whole bunch of stuff about the French Revolution because it totally fits here and it's really interesting. But I was going to talk about the Bible today, so we're going to do the fast version. The French Revolution gets started in 1789. You probably remember this from history class. And it feels like it's pretty justified, right? You remember that? It was like, there's some age-old injustices here. Something needs to be done, and the people rise up, and there's this Western, liberal, Enlightenment, freedom-minded thing that happens, and gradually over the course of a few years, the monarchy is disbanded, and they create this new constitutional republic, the First Republic it gets called. And maybe at that point when you're learning about it, you're like, yeah, dang straight. Take that, you fancy wig-wearing, leotarded jerks. That's what you get for treating people like that for so dang long. All right, I feel pretty good about it. We can just leave it right there. But then the revolution goes on. And pretty soon you're like, whoa, okay, that might be a little much, though. Like you're renaming all the days and months and years and like you're starting the calendar over. It's cool that you started a new government, but that seems a little bit bold. And, oh, wow, we're executing people with the guillotine. Tens of thousands of them, apparently. I still agree with the original cause, but it feels like maybe we're going a little far in the other direction. And this era that I'm talking about ends up being nicknamed after the fact. This isn't the name they gave themselves. The Reign of Terror. And I'm not even sure the Reign of Terror is the worst counter-reaction or overreaction in all of the history of the French Revolution. Because for more or less decades, you get these wild overreactions to things that people had previously done. And all of a sudden, if you're looking back at it through historical lenses, you're like, whoa, okay, corrective necessary, but let's pump the brakes a little bit. We're maybe going a little too far there. Likewise, in Matthew 27 and the ongoing discussion of theology and people that has happened in the 2,000 years since these events happened, there's been a thing that you're supposed to read and be like, dang, you guys really blew it. Something needs to be done here. But then there's an overreaction to it where it can quickly swing to, wait, whoa, no, I don't think we'd want to do that. And here's what I mean specifically. As we discussed yesterday in Matthew 27, Pilate's like, it's just no upside for me here. They clearly want somebody to die. The best way out is for this one guy to die, but I don't believe in this course of action. I don't think this is right. I'm washing my hands of this. And so Pilate's like, you want Christ to be killed? You want Barabbas released? Ick, I don't get it. What crime has he committed? Okay, fine. Pilate figures out that he's getting nowhere, and then he says, I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility. And then here's that key pivotal verse, verse 25. All the people answered, let his blood be on us and on our children. Now, look, given the data we have in front of us, and admittedly, this data is very much presented in favor as Jesus being the Messiah. I just happen to think the data is true, so I'm not concerned at all by those biases. But given that data, you're supposed to be really irritated as a reader with the behavior of that crowd. What the heck, people? How can you not understand what's going on here? How can you not look at that guy who's done the amazing things that he's done and compare it to this other guy who's a violent murderer, and you want the violent murderer guy? It's just insane. What's the matter with you people? This is totally upside down. This is why mobs and crowds can't be trusted. This is why we need some changes around here. That's the kind of stuff that you're supposed to be thinking as a reader. And then when Jesus is raised from the dead, you're like, yeah, both because that's awesome, and also, I suppose, because of the implications for like all of humankind moving forward and the idea that there's life after death and some purpose and meaning to this whole seemingly bewildering thing. But also, you're like, stick it to the man. Hey, you jerks who were so sure about everything and wanted this guy dead to protect your own power. You're looking pretty stupid now. There's supposed to be a tiny little bit of schadenfreude there. Maybe you don't want to lean into it too much, but it's there. And you're supposed to feel it even more as a corrective against this abuse and this injustice and this wrongdoing on this select group of Jewish leaders and the people they were able to whip up in that crowd. There's even more catharsis when you get into the book of Acts, and Peter just calls them out and makes them look like fools. This Jesus who you crucified, he says in Acts chapter 4, as they try to weasel off the hook and make it seem like, well, I mean, it's just a thing that kind of happened. I mean, who could really say exactly how things, let's not worry about who crucified who. Nah, Peter's like, you did it. It was you. This is a matter of public record, and I'm just not going to let you memory hole this one. You guys were the deciders on that. You own this. And maybe there's still some degree of catharsis when the Jewish leaders go on to brutally, mercilessly persecute Christians in the coming decades. They even wrangle up a dude named Saul to go around and do horrible things to them. They are carrying out active persecutions against Christians leading up to 70 AD. But maybe there's a little more catharsis when then you read the history books and you're like, dang, they got their entire temple taken down. They got their stuff wrecked by the Romans. Wow. And then it looks like there's still persecution that happens after that. And gradually the Romans take over that persecution and they do more of it. But maybe even by 100 AD, you're still in this first phase of the French revolutionary mindset of like, you guys did a lot of stuff wrong. I mean, specifically the religious leaders and the religious leaders' intellectual descendants, and you still haven't answered for what you did wrong. And these murderous injustices continue to be carried out, killing Stephen, killing James, killing who knows how many other people. And man, I want to see some justice for that. I want to see somebody answer for that. I'm still pretty frustrated, but there's some kind of pivot that happens in there somewhere where the temple system gets taken apart because of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. That deals a huge blow to this tribe of religious leaders who were the ones responsible for Jesus' death in the most specific of senses. Obviously, the executioners are the ones who pulled the trigger, and Pilate's the one who signed the order, but they never would have done that stuff if it weren't for the religious leaders. And Jesus says as much explicitly throughout the second half of the book of Matthew. But that little tribe, that little social class of religious leaders, it takes a big hit in 70 AD. It goes into serious decline. And by the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt in the early 100s AD, the 2nd century AD, they're all but washed up when Rome comes in and violently, ruthlessly puts down this Jewish impulse toward revolution, and they're done. They don't even get to be a province anymore. They're no longer Judea after that. Like the whole government system you and I have been reading about for 3 years that's in place, that is gone. The temple is gone. The religious leadership as we've known it is gone. Look, their house is left to them desolate, basically nothing left. And then there's a neutral point for a while, maybe a few hundred years, before we start to see the decline of Rome as an imperial power, and we start to see a rise in influence of the church. And the church, while it still gets a lot of things right, flips from being a persecuted church to being a persecuting church in the late classical age, and especially into the early and high Middle Ages. And by the time you're into the high Middle Ages, they are rabidly persecuting church, and we got serious abuses and violence and problems going on, and a lot of that is carried out against Jewish people. And now you see where I'm going with the comparison to the French Revolution, right? It unfolds much more slowly than the French Revolution, but the relationship between the Jewish people who are a part of the religious tradition who rejected Jesus and had him killed, and Christians goes through multiple phases where at first you're very sympathetic to the Christians who are being abused and unjustly persecuted, till eventually you get to a place where you're like, all right, now we're kind of in a rest period, to eventually, I think the fair and honest reader of history gets to a place after several centuries of saying, dang, I kind of feel sympathetic for the Jewish people who are being persecuted by some people under the banner of Christ. And as we have discussed at great length over on the YouTube channel, this verse in Matthew chapter 27 is one of the key verses that is very defining of that later, hundreds of years later, mistreatment of Jewish people that happens in certain pockets of Christianity. So Pilate is saying, this blood is off of my hands, and then the crowd that is gathered, which I think is not reflective of the larger Joe normal Jewish guy, workaday fellow opinion throughout Judea, but the people who showed up, they had a vested interest in seeing Jesus dead. They're worked into a frenzy by the religious leadership, maybe even paid. We've seen that kind of behavior from them, one of those spontaneously paid crowds that pretends like they feel something strongly, but it's really a political stunt. They respond to Pilate's statement saying, like, they just have their hands out, like, give us that blood. We'll take it. We want that blood on our hands. And also, we want it on the hands of our children. Well, as we get into the Middle Ages, some Christians and Christian leaders look at that and they're like, I'll tell you who did all this. It's those Jews. but they're thinking anachronistically and they're not thinking theologically. And because they aren't using proper thought or moral thought about the value of other people, they get this way wrong and from time to time carry out really ugly behavior against Jewish people in Europe. In the 11th and 12th centuries, on the front end of several of the crusades that are supposed to be going to liberate the Holy Land from the Muslims who conquered it, which is, I get why they wanted to do it. Whether it was a good idea or not, I can at least say I understand the impulse. What I don't understand the impulse toward is, why are you hurting Jewish people along the way? But they did. And this verse, lifted totally out of the context of the rest of the book of Matthew, was one of the things that was pointed to for this idea of Jewish perpetual guilt, this legend of the poor wandering Jew who has to never know a home and carries the curse of this decision made in that courtyard on that specific day and this specific response to Pontius Pilate. They have to carry that with them forever, and let that be a cautionary tale for what happens when you mess with Jesus, I guess. I don't know. You can see it doesn't make a lot of sense. As I said, we've talked about this from a big picture perspective over on the YouTube channel, but here we're doing a little different exercise, and so I just want to process through this in line with the text we're looking at and think about what we're supposed to make of it and what precedent it sets moving forward next time around. Hey, the other day I asked if you'd be willing to think about writing a review of this podcast on a podcast app, and a bunch of you did. I read a bunch of those over the weekend. All of them were very kind and made me smile. Some of them were particularly funny as well. You know who you are. Thank you for being clever and having fun with that. I do read all of those, and it does help broaden the circle of our conversation, so I super appreciate it. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.